She thought she could cheat, lie, and walk away unscathed, but she never expected me to outplay her at her own game. This isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about revenge, consequences, and a man who refused to be the fool. My name is Paul Andrews, and this is the story of how my wife's personal hygiene ultimately led to the downfall of our marriage and family. My ex-wife, Sarah Ridgway Andrews, and I first met through a blind date arranged by mutual friends. At the time, she had just graduated from college and was starting her career at First United National Bank. With a degree in business management, she had secured a position in their associate management program, eager to climb the corporate ladder. As for me, I was new in town, having recently begun working at Allied Accounting. Since I didn't know many people yet, one of my colleagues, Steve, decided to set me up on a double date with his girlfriend, Brenda. Steve and Brenda had been dating for about 6 months, and they were convinced that Sarah and I would hit it off, believing we shared similar interests. And so, there we were, an accountant and a young business professional embarking on their first blind date. To say the evening was thrilling would be an overstatement. It became clear early on that neither of us had any expectations for romance, let alone anything physical. Not that I would have minded some flirtation. Sarah, an average-looking blonde, might have been more appealing had she shown even the slightest bit of warmth. Instead, she remained reserved, almost distant, seeming hesitant about any physical contact. Her outfit, a thick sweater, a long skirt, and a structured jacket, made it evident that she wasn't trying to highlight any curves, assuming she had any to begin with. Despite the lack of chemistry, we had an engaging conversation about our career goals. As it turned out, our ambitions were surprisingly aligned. We both came from middle-class families who had raised us in small towns, making the transition to big city life an adjustment. I had dreams of one day becoming an entrepreneur, using my accounting background to distinguish between a good business deal and a truly great one. Sarah, on the other hand, envisioned a steady, upward trajectory in the corporate world, taking on bigger roles over time. She mentioned that she planned to have children at some point, though she intended to take only brief maternity leaves before resuming her career. That little revelation made me wonder if one day she might actually be intimate with someone, maybe even more than just 2 or 3 times. It was a strange thought, but considering how distant she seemed, it crossed my mind. At the end of the evening, I walked her to her apartment, where she gave me a quick, passionless hug and thanked me for a nice night. While it wasn't exactly the spark of a lifetime, it was still better than drinking beer alone in my tiny apartment. When Monday rolled around, Steve popped into my office with a grin, eager to hear how the date had gone. I chuckled as I looked at Steve and said, "You must have had a really relaxing Saturday night with Brenda if you're giving me a high five first thing Monday morning." Steve grinned and nodded. "Oh, Saturday was great," he admitted. "But that's not why I'm congratulating you." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to explain. "Sarah couldn't stop talking about you to Brenda," he continued. "She was seriously impressed, man. She even told Brenda to tell me to tell you that you should call her. Feels like junior high all over again, doesn't it?" I laughed at the comparison. It had been a pleasant evening, sure, but I didn't think I had done anything particularly impressive. Still, the fact that Sarah had gone out of her way to send a message through Brenda made it clear she was interested. I figured I might as well give her a call. And that's how it all started. Sarah, as I later came to understand, had spent most of her life focused on her goals. She had been raised with strong values, and given the way she carried herself, it was clear that she took her career and reputation seriously. In a world where women were sometimes objectified in the workplace, she had made a conscious effort to dress conservatively, steering clear of unwanted attention. But beneath that composed and professional exterior, there was a woman who was passionate, caring, and, as I soon discovered, capable of deep affection. Our connection grew stronger with time, not just physically but emotionally. What started as mutual admiration developed into real trust, and before we knew it, we were in love. Marriage felt like the natural next step. We tied the knot, and soon after, our 2 daughters, Hannah and Miranda, came into the picture. Parenthood changed us in all the best ways. Surprisingly, our intimacy didn't fade, it thrived. If anything, having children brought us even closer, strengthening our bond in ways I hadn't expected. Like many young couples, we started small, purchasing a modest home and upgrading to the obligatory minivan. Sarah was making strides in her career, climbing the corporate ladder with relentless determination. She began taking on more responsibilities, thriving in leadership roles. Meanwhile, I had an opportunity to take a different path. A new company had offered me a solid accounting position, but deep down, I knew I wanted more than just crunching numbers for the next 35 years. "I don't know, Sarah," I confessed to her one night. "If I take this job, I'm afraid I'll end up resenting every debit and credit I have to record for the rest of my life. She looked at me thoughtfully. Then what do you really want to do? This is my chance, I said with conviction. My chance to finally break out of the routine and chase what I've dreamed of since I was a kid. I want to do more than just track money, I want to build something. Advise people. Make deals. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Okay. But how do you plan to make it work? To start, I'll work from home while I build a steady stream of income, I explained. Sarah was supportive, though she had her reservations. In the beginning, my income fluctuated. Some months were great, others were lean. By the second year, however, my business had gained traction and I was actually earning more than Sarah. She was proud of my success, but ever the pragmatic one, she preferred stability. You should try to create a more consistent monthly income, she suggested. Something reliable. I understood where she was coming from, but I had no interest in the safe and predictable. My business model was evolving. I had shifted from simple bookkeeping to consulting on high-level deals. I was helping businesses make smarter financial decisions rather than just recording what they earned and spent. This was exactly what I had always wanted to do. And I was thriving. With financial success on my side, I felt like life was moving in the right direction. But what I didn't realize at the time was that things were quietly shifting in ways I couldn't yet see. The stability I thought we had? It wasn't as solid as I believed. Not yet aware of what was coming, I kept pushing forward, unaware that the foundation of our marriage was slowly beginning to crack. As my startup business grew, I found myself investing more and more into it. While I was pouring time and resources into the company, the financial benefits weren't immediately reflected on paper. The shares I had purchased were recorded at their initial modest value, but in reality, the business had evolved far beyond those early numbers. With a strong team in place, one that was knowledgeable and capable, I had the rare privilege of stepping back a little, allowing me to focus more on my children. For the first time in years, I had the flexibility to be truly present in their lives. No matter how hectic tax season became, I made it a priority to attend every recital, concert, and sporting event they participated in. I handled all the parent-teacher conferences on my own, never once relying on Sarah to join me. These moments, though exhausting at times, were fulfilling. I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be as a father. But something else was becoming painfully clear. Sarah and I were drifting apart. At first, I convinced myself that she was simply busy with work, that the distance between us was temporary. But as time went on, I realized that wasn't the case. It wasn't just that we weren't spending time together. She actively avoided including me in her professional life. And if I was being honest, she seemed to be avoiding me altogether. I knew it was time for a conversation. That Saturday afternoon, I decided to confront her. I found her in the living room and gently asked, "Can you sit with me for a few minutes? I think we need to talk." She barely looked at me before responding with a tone of irritation. "It can wait. I want to finish washing some of your laundry." I wasn't going to let her brush me off. "Thanks, but I really think we should talk now." Sarah sighed and continued folding clothes. "It can wait until tonight," she muttered. "Can you carve out 15 minutes in your schedule?" She didn't even look at me when she answered, just gave a dismissive, "Yes, I can do it then," over her shoulder before walking away. That evening after dinner, I decided not to wait any longer. As she got up to clear the plates, I turned to her and said firmly, "I think now is the right time to talk." The words barely left my mouth before she shot me an indignant look. The tension was immediate. The clatter of her fork hitting the plate made both of our daughters turn their heads toward me, sensing that something was wrong. Taking a deep breath, I pressed on. "Sarah, I feel like we're growing further and further apart. I'm really worried about our marriage." She remained silent, her expression hard to read. "We don't talk the way we used to," I continued, my voice steady but laced with frustration. "And more than anything, I feel like you don't respect me as your husband." The weight of those words lingered in the air. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't have a quick response. "I think we need to finish this conversation before we go to bed," I said, but Sarah had already moved on. She busied herself with some work in the office, and after making sure the girls were in bed, I turned in for the night. I told myself that if she didn't like how things were going, she could sleep on the sofa. But close to midnight, she finally walked into the bedroom. Without a word, she undressed, then climbed into bed beside me. I lifted the blanket to let her in, unsure of what to expect. To my surprise, she pressed herself close against me and murmured, "I'm not saying I was wrong, but I'll try to treat you with the respect I want from my husband." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing I'd gotten from her in a long time. I wrapped my arms around her and whispered, I think that's wonderful. For a moment, it felt like a step in the right direction. No matter what was going on between us, I remained devoted to our family. I was always there for our daughters, present in their lives in every way I could be. But despite my efforts, there was an unease growing between Sarah and me, one that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then one Tuesday evening something strange happened. I was downstairs when I suddenly heard Sarah cursing from the master bathroom. Concerned, I hurried upstairs to see what was wrong. She was standing at the sink, visibly frustrated. "Damn, damn, damn," she muttered under her breath. "What happened?" I asked, stepping inside. She let out an irritated growl. My wedding ring fell down the drain. I glanced at the sink and considered the situation. Think I have a shot at retrieving it, or should I call a plumber? She shot me a look, the kind that was more condescending than concerned. "Do you think you can handle it?" I hated the way she questioned my abilities, as if I were useless when it came to fixing things. Ignoring her jab, I crouched down and started working on the pipe. But then, something odd caught my attention. As I reached inside to check the trap, I noticed something unexpected. A box of enemas. I froze for a moment. What the hell? Sarah had always complained about her digestive issues, constantly bringing up irritable bowel syndrome and frequent diarrhea. But I had never seen her use anything like this before. And then, as I looked closer, something else stood out. The nozzle was wet. A wave of unease settled over me. The old saying is that the husband is always the last to know. But what exactly was I supposed to know? I tried to brush it off, but my gut told me that something wasn't adding up. A few nights later, I was working on a new business plan when I felt the need to double-check something. I went back to the bathroom, opening the cabinet where I had first seen the enema kit. The brown box had been moved. The douche tip was still wet. And the box itself was slightly out of place, just an inch off from where I had seen it last. My stomach turned. Someone was having sex. Serious sex. And they were using a Ziploc bag to clean up after. I stared at the misplaced box, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't want to believe. Sarah had secrets, and I was just starting to uncover them. I carefully removed Sarah's foul-smelling thong and sent it off for testing, wanting concrete proof of what I already suspected. If there was anything biological on it, I'd have my answer soon enough. Being an accountant, I was well versed in the financial side of divorce. I had conducted numerous assessments for couples over the years, helping divide assets, determine alimony, and assess child support. I knew exactly how property would be distributed in our situation. The house and our daughters would stay with me. Sarah would have to start over elsewhere. With that in mind, I decided to have a little fun. Quietly, I made my way over to her alarm clock and switched it off. She despised being late for work, but after what had clearly been a long and eventful night, I figured she might enjoy some extra sleep, whether she wanted it or not. At breakfast, the kids asked where their mother was. "She got home late, so she's probably sleeping in," I told them casually. They nodded in understanding. They knew the feeling of wanting to sleep in whenever possible. Later that morning, I watched from a distance as Sarah groggily stumbled into the garage, clearly running late. She hastily threw her things into the car and backed out too quickly, only to misjudge the distance and slam the rear of the Lexus into the garage door. The impact crushed the bottom two panels. Hearing the noise, the kids and I walked over to the door just in time to witness her reaction. Though we couldn't hear her through the closed windows, it was obvious she was screaming in frustration, repeatedly hitting the steering wheel. I smirked. After she finally managed to yank the car forward, I straightened the bent garage panels and lifted the door, making sure it let out a long, piercing squeak. Sarah roared out of the driveway, barely missing the mailbox in her frustration. This was going to be more entertaining than I thought. I wondered how long it would take her to realize her phone was dead. Without it, she wouldn't be able to call into work or complain to whoever she had been whispering to on those late-night calls. The less I had to hear about her tangled web of lies, the better. Since the morning had already gone so well, I decided to take the next step in my plan. I informed my assistant that I had a few personal matters to take care of and would be back after lunch. My first stop? A security store. I picked up several small surveillance cameras, discreet enough to go unnoticed, along with a voice recorder that I could hide in her purse. I needed to gather evidence. To truly understand my enemy, I had to know exactly what she was planning next. Once I returned home, I got to work installing the cameras. The living room and bedroom were my primary targets. If she was going to slip up, it would happen in one of those two places. Now it was just a matter of waiting. I managed to fix the damaged garage panels just enough to make them functional, but they were far from aesthetically pleasing. Every time Sarah looked at them, they would serve as a reminder of her own carelessness. With that taken care of, I focused on my next move. Taking my time, I made a small, precise slit in the lining of her purse and carefully slid the voice recorder inside. It was undetectable, completely hidden in the fabric. Now, all I had to do was wait for her to incriminate herself. Not wanting to share a bed with her, I made my way downstairs and crashed on the sofa in the living room. Tomorrow morning would be a spectacle, and I had no desire to be caught in the middle of it. And just as expected, at full volume, Sarah's alarm clock blasted the latest rap song, shaking the house like an explosion. The chaos erupted instantly. Before the first beat had even finished, Sarah's enraged voice cut through the noise. "Your mother," she screeched, her words dripping with confusion and frustration. That was immediately followed by the panicked screams of our two daughters. No drill sergeant in the U.S. Marines could have made more noise than Sarah did that morning. She stormed through the house, her anger growing as she realized that nothing was going her way. The frustration of being locked out of her accounts, thanks to a few incorrect password attempts on her usual sites, only fueled her fury. As if that wasn't enough, the lining of her favorite shoes had started peeling, an issue I had subtly encouraged. And then there was her car. Every time Sarah hit the brakes, turned a corner, or simply drove down the street, a tiny ball bearing, carefully placed inside the door panel, would roll around, making an infuriating rattle. Just loud enough to be noticed but not enough to be traced easily. It was death by 1,000 cuts. One by one, little inconveniences chipped away at her. And we had officially reached the 500th level. But now it was time for the biggest test. That Tuesday after work, Sarah returned home to change, then headed straight for Motel 6 off the highway. I followed at a safe distance, parking far enough away to avoid suspicion. From my vantage point on the street, I watched as she met up with him. They entered a room with an exterior entrance, just another cheap, discreet rendezvous spot for their affair. Knowing they'd be occupied for at least a couple of hours, I pulled into the lot and jotted down the make, model, and license plate number of her boyfriend's car. Then, in the cover of darkness, I crouched beside the vehicle and carefully let just enough air out of the driver's side front tire to trigger the low tire pressure warning on the dashboard. Not flat, just low, enough to be a nuisance, forcing him to deal with it before leaving. As I made my way back to my car, I passed a parked truck and spotted a discarded gas station receipt. A small but useful detail. Later, with a little digging, I discovered her boyfriend's name, Keith. And I confirmed one more thing: Sarah and Keith weren't just sneaking around. They were enjoying each other. Through careful observation, I discovered that Sarah and Keith had a routine. Tuesday nights were for partying, and every other Thursday they spent the day at the Hyatt, all during business hours. It was Sarah's turn to book the room, and apparently, they found it amusing that the conservative bank president was unknowingly funding their little escapades. Using their corporate credit cards, they paid for luxury rendezvous at the Hyatt, knowing full well that no one at the bank would question the expenses. Since the bank's headquarters was conveniently located near the hotel, it had become their preferred spot. A safe haven for their betrayal. Then, in one of their recorded conversations, Sarah's voice came through, clear and smug. "You won't be able to find it in the divorce. I use it for household expenses while building my secret stash." Keith chuckled before responding. "Speaking of divorce, when are you finally going to pull the trigger on your frigid wife?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "That date, my dear, is carved in stone." And then came the real bombshell. She wasn't just waiting for the right moment, she was waiting for the right payout. "My father made Keith sign a prenup before we got married," she admitted. "He only agreed to it when we added a validity period, 20 years. Once we hit that mark, he gets 50% of my multi-million-dollar stock portfolio." Then she laughed. "You see? The timing is perfect." My stomach twisted as I processed her words. This wasn't just an affair, this was premeditated deception. She had planned everything. At this point, I knew I needed to start preparing for the inevitable. If Sarah thought she was going to take advantage of me, she was in for a rude awakening. I reached out to Jeff, my lawyer, to finalize the details of our divorce agreement. If Sarah wants to play games, I'll make sure I win. Together, we devised a fair but strategic plan. The house would be split 50-50 until it was sold, but that wouldn't happen until both girls left for college. We would each keep our own investments and retirement funds. Since I had carefully managed my taxable income to be about the same as hers, neither of us would owe child support. She would be responsible for regular childcare expenses, including college tuition. Our savings covered tuition, housing, books, and food, but not everything, so any extra costs would come out of her pocket. Sarah had spent years looking down on me, treating me as less than because I hadn't climbed the corporate ladder the way she had. And nothing made that clearer than the Hyatt Gala. Every year, the bank's senior management team hosted an exclusive formal dinner, dance, and networking event at the Hyatt Hotel. It was a black tie affair, tuxedos, evening gowns, and the highest-ranking executives in attendance. Sarah had told me about this event years ago, back when it was just a distant goal for her. But by the time she finally made it to that elite circle, I had already been deemed unworthy. She never let me forget it. If only you had been more successful, she would remind me again and again, as if my worth as a husband depended on my corporate title. What she didn't realize was that success isn't just measured in promotions. And soon enough she would learn that the hard way. I might have been able to tolerate Sarah's arrogance at the Hyatt Gala, but now the truth was unraveling faster than I expected. The call came from my private investigator. "I've got something," he said. "Can you come to my office?" I wasted no time getting there. After sitting me down, he laid it all out. Her lover was Keith Miller, a senior loan officer at the same bank where Sarah worked. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't just a personal betrayal, this could have serious professional consequences for both of them. "They don't technically report to each other," the investigator continued, "but Sarah's main job is to ensure that the credit department follows compliance regulations. And on top of that," he paused, giving me a knowing look, "there's a strict no fraternization policy between employees." I let out a slow breath. She had put her entire career at risk for this. As I processed the information, my phone buzzed. A notification from the hidden camera. I pulled it up and watched as Sarah and Keith left their motel room together, completely unaware that I had them on film. Technology really has made our lives so much easier. Even though Sarah was back home before noon on Saturday, she completely avoided us until late Sunday morning. Spiritually, she should have been in church. Instead, she chose to stay home and sulk. Sarah had always come home on Wednesday afternoons looking exhausted. I had assumed it was because of the late-night business courses she claimed to be taking on Tuesdays. But this Wednesday was different. I was already suspicious, so I waited for her to arrive. As soon as she walked through the door, she headed straight for the bathroom. I followed quietly, knowing exactly what I needed to do. She turned on the shower, expecting steaming hot water. Instead, she was met with ice-cold water. A piercing scream filled the house. "What the hell?" She scrambled, desperately trying to get out, but I had taken precautions. The door was jammed. I stood just outside, barely containing my laughter. Sarah cursed, slipped, and struggled as the freezing water drenched her. Finally, I pulled the door open and she stumbled out, shivering, dripping, and furious. And then she slapped me. I barely reacted. She had no one to blame but herself. At the sound of all the chaos, our daughters ran in, only to find their naked, enraged mother having yet another meltdown. And then, in one of the lowest moments I had ever witnessed, she turned her anger on them. "This is all your fault. You used up all the hot water. Because of you, I couldn't get the relaxation I needed. Damn you both." The girls froze. They were too stunned to speak, but I could see the hurt in their eyes. I stepped forward, crouching down to their level, and gently said, "None of this is your fault. You are wonderful children, and I am so proud of you. Please forgive your mother for her actions, and forgive me for letting this happen." They looked up at me, unsure at first, but my words seemed to calm them down. At that moment, I reminded myself, I had to be very careful in how I separated the three of us from Sarah. It was tempting to keep making her miserable, but my priority had to be the girls. By the time we got them settled, it was already late. Sarah retreated to our bedroom while I laid down on the living room sofa, not wanting to be anywhere near her. But even in the darkness, I could hear the lingering sadness in my daughters' voices. Sarah had apologized to them, but her cruel words had already cut too deep, and nothing she said could take them back. I asked the girls if they'd like to join me for a week-long ski trip to Breckenridge. I barely finished my sentence before they rushed toward me, hugging me tightly and kissing me on the cheek. Their excitement was undeniable. That evening, I booked plane tickets to Denver for the four of us. Despite everything that had happened, I had decided to give Sarah one last chance to salvage our marriage. This trip could have been an opportunity for her to show she still cared about our family. But I already knew where her priorities lay. When I told Sarah about the trip, I didn't get the reaction I had hoped for. Instead of showing interest or asking about the details, she smirked and raised an eyebrow. She wasn't thinking about skiing. She was thinking about 7 nights alone in our home, with Keith. Sarah's job had nothing to do with financial statements or year-end reports, yet she suddenly claimed that year-end obligations at the bank would prevent her from taking time off. It was a weak excuse. And I didn't need to be a financial expert to see through the lie. Since I had already anticipated her response, my private investigator made the necessary adjustments. The cameras in our house were upgraded to Wi-Fi-enabled streaming, allowing me to monitor everything from Colorado in real time. Sarah thought she was about to have the perfect getaway with Keith. She had no idea what was coming. A little spice for Sarah. The next evening I received an alert on my phone. Movement detected. I opened the app, ready to see what my wife and her lover were up to. But instead of finding them tangled in each other's arms, I witnessed something much more entertaining. Sarah was screaming. Not in pleasure. In pain. She thrashed around the kitchen, her hands clutching her face as if it were on fire. Apparently, she had just discovered that her life-saving tube of Preparation H had been laced with jalapeno juice. Her bright red face contorted in agony as she stumbled around, shrieking. I couldn't help but smirk. I imagine my private investigator would have had a field day watching this unfold. Well, I guess Keith won't be a welcome guest tonight. And if the burning sensation lasted long enough, they might not be able to have sex the entire week while the kids and I were gone. What a shame. A new connection. Meanwhile, in Breckenridge, the kids and I were having an incredible time. One evening, we attended a family-friendly event with live music and dancing. The girls were having a blast, running around with new friends while I sat back and took it all in, sipping on a Diet Coke. Every now and then, they would glance over at me and I'd raise my drink, reassuring them that everything was okay. The room was filled with parents keeping an eye on their children, but one woman in particular caught my attention. She was on the other side of the dance floor doing the same thing I was, watching over her kids. Our eyes met. She smiled. And I smiled back. Her two boys would occasionally run over to her, asking for money, snacks, or drinks just like my daughters did with me. Before long, our kids started hanging out together. When the event ended, we found ourselves sitting at the same table. She introduced herself as Donna. I have to say, she noted with a grin, your daughters are incredibly well behaved. Or maybe I just keep a close eye on them, I replied with a smirk. Donna laughed. You're very observant. It's nice to see a father so involved. We chatted for a while and I learned that she worked from home, allowing her to be there for her boys every morning and afternoon. They're the most important part of my life, she said warmly. I nodded. Same here. A new beginning. Over the next few days the kids grew inseparable and so did Donna and I. We spent time together, enjoying long conversations, deep laughs, and a newfound sense of connection. And when the kids weren't around, we spent the late hours making out on the couch. By the end of the week, one thing was clear to both of us. We needed to spend more time together. Even the kids agreed. It was time for me to end my marriage. The final goodbye. When we returned home, Sarah looked absolutely drained. Tired. Exhausted. Maybe she should have joined us in Colorado. We had a fantastic time. And watching my hot new connection flourish before my eyes made me realize just how much I had been missing all along. I didn't need to watch the cameras anymore. I had seen enough. It was time to end this. That evening, I sat Hannah and Miranda down for an important conversation. No matter what happens, you two will stay in this house and continue at your school. Whoever you choose to live with, whether it's me or your mother, will also have custody of the house until you both go to college. Their eyes widened slightly, processing what I was saying. This isn't a decision you need to make right now, I assured them. Take your time. It's important. Just remember, both your mom and I love you no matter what. They nodded quietly. For now, I continued, I need you both to take my car and go out for dinner. Your mom and I need to talk, and trust me, you don't want to be here for this conversation. They didn't argue. They understood. The end of a marriage. Once the girls were gone, I turned to Sarah, my voice steady but firm. Sarah, you made your choice. You could have built a life with me and the girls. We could have started over, even moved to Colorado. But you decided Keith was more important than your family. I exhaled, shaking my head. Now you have to face the consequences. She stared at me, her expression unreadable. I need you to pack up everything you need and move into a hotel while we sort things out. I'm not going to throw your things out on the lawn and burn them today, but make no mistake, you can't stay here. She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. You'll see the girls whenever you want. I'm not going to stop you from being their mother. But after you check into a hotel, you need to find yourself a lawyer. They'll explain exactly what I'm offering in the divorce. I leaned back, crossing my arms. I think that's fair. But you need to decide for yourself. At that moment, we both knew we were done. Whatever love we had once shared, whatever good memories we had built over the years, had been completely squeezed out of us. Sarah had made her choice. Now I was making mine. A new beginning. Unlike many other men, I was fortunate to walk away from the marriage with a fair divorce settlement. And, most importantly, Hannah and Miranda chose to stay with me. Sarah saw them once a week, sometimes once every two. But the visits were strained. They hated her questions about me. "Does your father miss me?" she would ask. The girls would roll their eyes and shrug, giving vague answers before changing the subject. For me, contact with Sarah was minimal. I made sure I wasn't around when she came to pick them up or drop them off. She disliked the way I had cut her out of my life so completely. But she had no one to blame but herself. And Keith? His perfect little fantasy world came crashing down. His marriage collapsed, and his wife took a significant portion of his income for child support. His financial problems were further compounded when the company that provided the corporate bonds discovered he and Sarah had committed bank credit card fraud. Now they were being sued for damages. And to top it off, Keith had lost his job. He was completely ruined. Meanwhile, Sarah had taken a humbling step down the career ladder. She was now working as a paralegal in a divorce attorney's office. I had to admit there was a certain irony in that. After years of deception, she was now learning firsthand about the legal and social consequences of her actions. A second chance at happiness. As for me, I had moved on. After the divorce was finalized, I invited Donna and her boys to my place for the weekend. There was no sex between us. We both wanted to set a good example for our kids. But that didn't mean we held back on affection. There were plenty of stolen kisses. Plenty of warmth. She was exactly what I needed. The best medicine to erase the scars of my past marriage. We both knew where this was going. Donna already had a place of her own, and we had no problems yet. But there was one complication: our teenagers. My daughters and her boys were 16 years old and enjoyed spending time together. Maybe a little too much. For now, we took things one step at a time. And for the first time in years, I was happy.